session. I'm delighted that I have been asked to be in conversation with Yogesh, and I think Yogesh is one of the most exciting voices in Indian publishing today. He's a poet, he's a translator, he's a writer of fiction, he's a writer of non-fiction, and more than all of this, he's a publisher, right? And those of us who have worked even briefly in publishing or have, are familiar with the industry, we know how much effort it goes in to publish even one book, right? And to do that without the support of any big corporation, without a lot of funding, the sheer labor of doing it is enormous, right? And therefore, I think what Yogesh is doing is marvelous. It's not unprecedented because this has happened before in India. A lot of poets and writers have got together to do it, but every time you start doing it anew, it's a challenge, right? Okay, so our session is called When Marathwada Was Burning, right? I'm sure many of you would know Marathwada is this largish area in central west Maharashtra. It translates roughly, and I do not know Marathi, so this is just research that I've done. It translates roughly to mean the house of Marathi people, right? And it came into prominence in the 18th century when this area was ruled by the Nizam of Hyderabad, and a lot of Marathi people, Marathi-speaking people, lived there. Now, when was Marathwada burning? I think it refers to the late 1970s, when there was a movement in Marathwada to rename the Marathwada University as Bhimrao Ambedkar University, right? The movement was begun by several Dalit activists. It also had the involvement of this very powerful group called Dalit Panthers, and we'll talk about Dalit Panthers in a bit. But the movement turned violent, right? And those who observed it, those who studied it, like Dalit studies scholar Gail Omvat, she says it took the turn of a caste war. And for 2 years, Dalits and Dalit activists and Dalit families who were in no way connected with this activism were also targeted. 900 houses of people living in Marathwada were burned. Many people were killed, including children, were targeted and killed for a period of 2 years. Finally, the movement did become partially successful when Marathwada University was renamed in the early 1990s as B.R. Ambedkar Marathwada University, right? That's what it's called still, right? Yogesh told me he's not from Marathwada. He's from Vidarbha. But maybe we can begin by talking about, movements for Dalit emancipation or Dalit rights in Maharashtra, about which Yogesh really can illuminate.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Bangalore Poetry Festival for organizing these events. Like the place where I come from, our struggle and poetry has an inevitable relation. So, like if I have to look at my history, if I have to look at the history of struggle, the struggle of my community for justice, for emancipation, to achieve the dignified status, it cannot be, I cannot see it avoiding poetry or the role of poetry or the existence of it. So as in the past, like 1927, when Dr. Ambedkar came into the social life with Mahar Satyagraha, and many Dalit activists followed him to make sure that this struggle for the water, just to reclaim that, not to reclaim the Mahar lake, but just to reclaim that, because the public law in India has been such that the touch of an untouchable, the ex-untouchable, can be polluting to the water. So just to reiterate, just to assert that this public law are based on a very stupid and very unscientific ideas and the notion, like the Mahar Satyagraha was laid, and then from 1927, poetry has become an inevitable part of it, because from 1927, some of the Dalit artists who were singers, who were music instrument players and all, and erstwhile they were using music for entertainment or music has been inherent to them because of their pain or also because of their occupation, started using music to disseminate, to spread Ambedkar's ideas and his teachings. So that was, it's 2023, and it's almost like 100 years that we have been looking at, or we have been practicing poetry within the community in order to reclaim and again and again reclaiming our own like personhood in our own ways. So from 1927 to 2023, a lot things have been changed in Maharashtra. Now the struggle for Marathwada it has been going on for 17 years, and innumerable. The state data is one thing, but the actual facts were very different. So and this struggle, the burning of the houses, the atrocities, the rapes, the murders, has been documented in poetry, because it comes very handy to everybody, not just to the Dalit community, but to everybody. Because if you don't have you don't have anything in order to assert yourself, but you always have this poetry. You always have either poetry you can write or you can sing. So the poetry in a singing in a vocal form has always been there with the Dalit community. But when they started getting into academic, they started getting into university, they started being conscious about their rights, their dignity, their personhood. They started also writing in, and that was the beginning of Dalit poetry in India, I can say. And 1927, then after Buddhist conversion, when Ambedkar, along with like 500,000 of Mahar followers and the others, have embraced Buddhism in 1956. The poetry has also went on to change, because that has the poetry almost has within the community has acquired a value system. So we can talk about pain, we can talk about our lives in our poetry, we can talk about our happiness, but then the value system was missing. So that value system came after 1956, after the conversion of Buddhism. And after that, there was 1970s, the Dalit Panther was there, and the Dalit Panther's poetry was so radical that it is still a part of a debate, it's still part of a discussion among many Dalit poets, not only Dalit poets, but I think across the world, whenever Dalit movement is talked about.
Right, and that is where you get the name of your publishing company, Panther's Paw, right? So maybe could you tell us very briefly about who the Dalit Panthers were? I'm sure some of us would know it, but it's good to remember. And of course, you have translated Daya Pawar's work. You have named your publishing initiative Panther's Paw. So maybe begin by telling us a bit about the Dalit Panthers and their connection to the Black Panthers and how they inspired you.
Yeah, so Uttaran, like yesterday we were talking about how this everything have come into existence, right? So in 1970s, Bombay was like, as we know, that it's cosmopolitan thing, but in 1970s, it was actually an everyday cosmopolitan thing, because the things which were happening around the world were at the same time being known and being read by people in Bombay. So that is one of the reason that why Dalit community in 1970s, like the almost first generation who went into academics, who were lettered, who were conscious, like speak in terms of Fanon, they were conscious being. And then when they started looking around that the atrocities are happening, and this is the everyday thing, this violence, this murder, these rapes are almost normalized, and they started reading about the Black Panthers during the same time in Bombay in newspapers, and then they kind of got an inspiration to also form a movement where, just like the black people are fighting in US back in that time, for their personal or for their rights, you know. So we are like it's just an inspiration, but like the social fabric of Indian society is very different. It's a caste fabric basically, and then that is how like Dalit Panther came into existence because and their methodology was very simple. Like wherever uh, the the atrocity takes place, they would go there in numbers and make sure that that atrocity can be handled in a very judicial, in a very with law and order. Because even now, like if something happens, if atrocity happens, the police or the law system hesitates to even register those things. So that was the basic thing, right? So law was there, but the people who were in a position to execute those laws were castes. So what do? So you need to also mobilize yourself, and that was the methodology of a panther. Now, in the poetry of a Dalit panther, like Namdev Dasad, Raja Dhale, Javi Pawar, Arun Kamble, uh, these were like the some of the main founding members of Dalit Panthers, and in their poetry you can find the poetry has been acquiring a power which earlier poetry in India didn't have it, because I mean, to understand the language is also language is not independent of our material reality. So the material reality with which we grow up or live, our language also shapes in that particular way. So when we look at the poetry of Dalit Panthers, they were very externally, like they were talking about the external operations, and it has been very powerful. Namdev Dosad literally changed the way the Marathi language has been read and written and has been understood, because the script was same, but he brought the life and the vocabulary and the context in poetry which were totally invisible to the Brahmin Marathi poets of that time. And that is why Golpita has become a landmark poetry collection in Indian poetry, Indian history of poetry after independence. That it has created, it has basically nurtured the generations of Dalit poets, and so to create their own forms. So these were the main some of the main founding members of Dalit Panthers. And like J.V. Pawar, he's a historian. He almost he had written almost about like 40 books. So one of the first volume of his about Ambedkarite movement in Maharashtra after Ambedkar's demise captures the history of that movement for 4 years. So that book I have like translated from Marathi into English, and that's how I thought that my efforts are following the path of the Panthers, who not only fought on the ground, they were not only the poets who are only visible in poetry recitation and the programs and the festivals. I mean, festivals were not there at that time, but they were not the court poets. They were the road poets. Like they basically there in the masses every day, and that's how their language has been shaped. And that is why, like, when the language of poetry, if it is not a language of mass, it cannot create a stir. And that we always say that poetry doesn't sell, but how can poetry be sold if the mass doesn't relate to that?
It's a very interesting point. How can poetry become popular if people who speaking in that language do not relate to it? When you make that point, the interesting contradiction is most of the Dalit Panthers, almost all of them, wrote in Marathi, right, which was their mother tongue, specifically in their accents, right? But you have chosen to write in English. Chandra Mohan, who is also a very powerful poet writing in English, he says that writing in English gives a sort of freedom to a Dalit poet, freedom from the inherent inbuilt casteist words and attitudes in many of our Indian languages, right? So why did you choose to write in English, and how do you think it helps with the activism for Dalit rights?
So yeah, this is a phenomenal change, as I would like to look at it in this way. And this change comes with a lot of realizations, because Not only Dalit poets in Maharashtra have written, but Dalit poets across the Indian states, in Telangana, in Andhra, in Tamil Nadu, in Karnataka, and in some parts of Kerala, and also in Hindi, Punjab, in Gujarati. They have written, they have been writing poetry ever since. Now, like this 90s, like this LPG era, liberalization, globalization, and so-called privatization, it, it introduced to us the world which was not accessible to us. Now, it is very simple for anybody to aspire for something which is very big. You know, for everybody during growing up in 90s, English was something very, very big. And that was also the period when they said the brain drain of IITs and especially IITs were happening. So, which was the education which was also happening in English. Now, Ambedkar had written in English. I mean, that was the language which was, I mean, which has not only administrative, but which also has although small, but a social existence, because it was a British India. So it was there, and his education had taken place in English only. Now, after that, like this English has become a status quo language. You know, it has become a language of aspiration. So only few people had access to this. Now, when I started understanding these things, that why can't I, who doesn't have access to these, can practice this language, can manage to write in this language. After all, it's also just a language. It's not a big thing. It's not a rocket science. Now, anything can be learned. As a human being, we can learn anything, right? I mean, if we choose to, if we commit to that thing, we can do that. And there is always a notion that when it comes to Dalit poetry, people read that poetry in translation, in English translation. They haven't written, they have not read in English. And I wanted to basically, that was, my journey with this language started with fascination, but it also started with this political understanding that I don't want to limit my voice to Maharashtra. I may, you know, like, I may not get translated in English if I write in Marathi, even if I will die, and I don't know what will happen after. So I don't want to limit myself, and that is the reason my hunger to speak, to sing my emotions, to write my emotions, to write my feelings is huge. And I thought I have perceived that English will give me the bigger canvas, not only here, across the state, but also like somewhere where I want to go. So I imagine myself in a world, you know, like the language in India is a very, it's very, it's liberatory, but it also like basically prohibits you from lot of other things to have access to or to enjoy. So I imagine myself as like, if I write poetry, it should be read by everybody across the world, so that shouldn't be there. So that was a simple thing, but there is a political underpinnings to that.
Of course. I have, of course, many questions, but I think it's time to throw it open to the audience. If anybody has any questions for Yogesh, I think Maitri has a question right there.
Hi Yogesh, hi Uttaran. Yogesh, having read your work, you just made a point saying, you know, the reason why you started writing in English was because you could reach to a larger audience. Now, having read your work, what I find very different, and this is for you know, the knowledge of everybody here who might not have read Yogesh, is that when you read Yogesh's poetry in English, you will find that unlike probably any other Indian writing in English, his poetry, what he thinks, he writes exactly that. You know, there is very little camouflage in his poetry in terms of craft. Now, I want to know, my question to you is, as you grow as a poet, uh, do you feel the need to change that at some point? Or do you think the messaging is more important than the craft of poetry? And are they simultaneously powerful for you in the journey of poetry? Or do you think the end is, the same? As in, good poetry sort of reaches to everybody, and hence the journey also, it completes the journey. If it's too complicated, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. But I got, yeah. Yes, I mean, when we start writing a poetry, when I have started writing poetry in English, and you said, you have said very precisely that like what I think, what I imagine, I write the same thing, and that is how language works within my mind. I cannot work with the language to create something which I myself cannot comprehend at some point of time. Yes, 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 yes. No, I took it as a compliment only. I got it. I'm saying because when we look at language as tool, which can do anything, I have always found that the class, any language, not only English, any language, a class in any society dictates that, but the mass in that society nourishes that language. And it is the mass who enriches the language. So for me, I come from a very, like, my experiences, my background and a lot of things. I hang around also with the people who, who we can say who born in that language. I didn't born in that language. Some of us maybe, because of the changing scenario in the education, but for me, this is how language is there within my mind, and this is how it comes out. Like when I think of, and when I think about, there is a saying, like I think Baldwin said that like it is not no like there is a famous phrase called that it is not I found this particular continent, but this particular continent was I was found by this particular continent. So I think it is I'm forgetting the name. So this is same with the poetry, because not everybody among the Dalit community are poet, although they have been having the same set of experiences and they have to go through something similar, right? In relation to the larger society. But some of us becomes poet, wants to become a poet, and I, like I cannot basically like, I have never written any poem by sitting and then thinking about it. So I wait for it to shape in my mind, and then it just like it's some that poem is a manifestation of what has been nurtured, or what comes into a circle. So yeah, but that is how you precisely said that, like what I think exactly, it's there in the this one.
Yeah, so it's a very spontaneous process, right, through which you come out with poetry. Okay, do we have any more questions? I think somebody there.
I have a bit of a tangent of a question, because you touched on very interesting themes in terms of democratization of poetry, right? And you talked about how they were road poets and not court poets. You also talked about expression and documentation of experience, so that people can sing those poetries, they can remember them. It's storytelling as much as it is poetry. So continuing with that thought, what do you think of Dalit rap or Marathi rap that is happening at this time, right? I can see a very interesting parallel between how the Black Panthers and the Dalit Panthers kind of grew together. One can almost see a similar parallel where the blacks have rap and their own expression, and you can now see the Dalits coming up with a very similar form of expression, because it is so raw, and it doesn't, there are no boundaries. You don't really need a lot of production. So one can see this as a very, very powerful tool in the hands of right people. There's a lot of interesting work happening, but somehow it doesn't get the benefit of the, or rather the credit of the art form that poetry would get, right?
Uh, because I'm also, for my PhD, I'm studying the anti-gas music, and also in relation to that, studying bits of other musical genres. So rap is like 50% beats and 50% poetry. That is rap. That's simple. But the power doesn't come to that rap easily. Like, uh, if you remember in 90s, Baba Saigal used to rap. But nobody relates to that. I mean, not many of us know what rap was that particular time. Some people had access to the world music, so they would imitate. But then, even if you listen that now, it doesn't feel relevant. If it was relevant then, if it was sung by somebody who came from that experience and who understood that, it could have been relevant now. So it's not that like when you talk about the present, it is always relevant, but because the legacy of rap has been shaped by black communities, especially from US, and now it has reaching so like to many African countries like Nigeria, like Kenya, and like people like Burna Boy from non-American black communities are making huge. So uh, in in US, how rap has started, the earliest rap, like during 1980s, 1988s, that rap had a social vocabulary. You know, it's very much pro-justice, it's very much against the injustice, it's very much the pain of the Harlem and the people. Now, what Kendrick Lamar is doing right now is, it's very subjective, but that subjectivity is also the subjectivity that community, and that subjectivity has not alienated from the social, and that is why, although their lyrics are different, although their rap has gone through a evolution, it is still relevant. And in Marathi and all, like there are rappers like Sambata and all, the hardest Marathi rap I could have ever listened to, the massive power which the lyrics have, and it comes from the life. I don't think so that it can be written down. It comes from the life, because your imagination needs a particular, I mean, your imagination is a subject of the life you live, right? So, and ultimately it is people who decide whom to keep the relevant or whom to keep in the scene, because even if you try very hard and all, and then you have written something, you have sung something, it's about the people. The more people relate to that, the more you become relevant, the more you become, like powerful as an artist. So there are all kinds of rap in Marathi, Dalit community. Some are doing like very in a meta narrative, some are doing very like democratic, I mean, it's Ambedkarite vocabularies, and some are doing very subjective, very life oriented, very deep, very emotional, very like attached to their feelings. But it everything has come and part and parcel of the life they imagine from their location of pain and the history.
Right. So, it's very real. How are we doing on time? Okay. Ma'am, I will have to stop you. Someone else had their hand up, and we have to go turn by turn, and I'm told we are out of time. So maybe we can take the conversation outside, but I'd like to take 1 minute and request Yogesh to read from his wonderful memoir, Water in a Broken Pot, which has come out from Penguin. It's available outside. Please get your copy, get it signed. And Yogesh, if you would just read.
Which chapter? I will read a paragraph from this book. Learning to see, the world I inherited, erased by the world I longed for, nothing remains but the evidence of me, a soldier, a battlefield, a war. For a Dalit person, his identity is always in transition as soon as he steps out of his home. Just as a black person is not black within their own community, but just another fellow human being, a Dalit too is just another fellow human being as long as they breathe among Dalits. To be a Dalit is to be in the constant process of discovering the self. Who is Dalit? To me, a Dalit is a person whose identity is shaped by untouchability practiced against him by society. He is untouched in all spheres of life in India. He is untouched in imagination as well. And when you don't exist for the society, except when serving it as its slave, because you need to survive, you become a repository of colossal dilemmas, inferiorities, paradoxes, and volcanic substances in their embryonic state. A Dalit person's liberation lies in overcoming these dilemmas, inferiorities, paradoxes, and eventually erupts like a volcano, careless and free. For a Dalit person, breaking free is an act of challenging the casteist conscience of this nation which has hitherto shaped them. Their arrival at themselves is ruthlessly met with the scorn of this society. Only a few among us become capable enough to acquire this state of liberation. Most of us, before reaching the state of liberation, are consumed by the consumption of commodities produced by a Brahminical capitalist system. But these most too have a story. This may not be the story of victory, but a story of their struggle. So let me tell you this. This story is not about a dream, but it's murder. This story is not about a hope, but it's mutilation. This story is not about assertion, but it's suppression. This story is not about liberation. It is about conditions that make liberation impossible. If you read it carefully, you will find that this, this is the story of silence and the violence it carries.
That's really amazing, Yogesh, and that's the first paragraph of this book. So imagine what the rest of the book is like. But thank you all so much for coming for this session. I'm sure all of you have a lot of questions for him. So maybe we can continue informally with that. And thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.